Hey, all you beautiful people out there, and welcome to another John Pendleton rebuttal. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for stopping by. Why don't you go ahead and subscribe for my fans and subscribers? Welcome back. If you are new, thanks for checking me out and giving me a chance. So, anyway, if you like this kind of content, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to me? I'm sure you won't be disappointed. And why don't you go ahead and check out the other videos I've already uploaded? Speaking of getting on with the video, grab your popcorn and your facepalm gear, get comfortable, and let's go pummel some creationism nonsense.
Welcome once again for visiting us in these very interesting, powerful creation science conferences. This is the second part, conference number 9, about mutations. And we're going to have a special section about cloning, as there's been a lot of questions about that. What exactly is it, and what does the Bible have to say about it? Now, this whole area of mutations is, before I didn't do this in 2 conferences. Now it's in 2 conferences. I've seen the great importance of it because according to biology, according to the evolutionary theory, the mutations, the errors that happen in the DNA programming is what has to cause the change from that one-cell amoeba to all the great and grand variety of plants, animals, insects, bacteria, viruses, people that we have.
Wow, John, thank you so much for showing all that Christian humility. You know, God's going to get really, really mad at you because, according to the Bible, He's the only one that can boast. You're not supposed to boast. So you might want to ask forgiveness. First of all, the Bible says nothing about cloning. Why would it? Because it didn't even exist at that time. Now, as for mutations, yeah, they're important. And mutations are just copying errors. I know that's oversimplified, so sue me, why don't you? But anyway, it's interesting that John is talking about mutations as if he doesn't believe they happen. But in a later video, or maybe this video, we will see that he believes mutations happen. What he doesn't seem to understand, and it's really no surprise because no creationist understands this, that mutations pile up and you end up getting something very different from what the original was. Come on, John, wake up. And I take it from what you said that you believe that we think that we all came from an amoeba, which is amazingly wrong. Amoebas were not the first life form. Come on, John, why don't you learn something for a change instead of spreading all this misinformation?
And the thing is, it's just plain wrong. There are mutations that happen, and they cause variety within a species, and they cause a lot of errors, but they do not cause the change from one species to another. And I can't think of a better way to start out this second part about mutations than to look at the human eye and to hear from none other than Charles Darwin. What does he think about it? You know, in Darwin's time, it was extremely impressive to Darwin about the human eye. But now in a period of over 160 years, we have learned a lot about the human eye. If Darwin thought it was an impressive organ, here we see a picture of it. Looks, well, just like a jewel. But even what it looks like as a jewel, how it functions is amazing.
Coolies! The human eye, one of my favorite topics. John, you have messed with the wrong girl when it comes to the human eye. because I majored in psychology and I know a lot about the human eye. But I do want to say before we move on that the argument of the human eye is one of the dumbest arguments for God that I have ever heard in my entire life. Let's go. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with the nitty gritty details of eye anatomy and physiology. However, it is important for me to point out that our eyes are backwards. So I guess the receptors are a good place to start. The rods and cones are receptors of the eye. Rods are used in low light and cannot distinguish color very well, whereas the cones are used within light and they do distinguish color. Fun fact, this is why you squint when going from low light, like a movie theater, out into the sunlight, because you are switching from your rods to your cones. So at the back of the eye, where you see the red and blue lines exiting the eye, that would be the optic nerve. And guess what? We have a blind spot there, and it's in both eyes. So we have two blind spots. Yeah, that's really an intelligent design. However, we generally don't realize that we have blind spots in our vision because of stereoscopic vision, meaning our fields of vision overlap and our brains collate the fields to make one coherent picture. The other reason we don't notice the whole is that our brains guess at what is supposed to be there. Now let me think here. I'm missing something. Oh, yeah. Did you know that the images from our eyes are upside down? That means our brains have to flip those images right side up. Why would an intelligent designer do that? Look, John, our brains are already energetically expensive. In fact, our brains use about 20% of the energy created by our bodies. So, this filling in the gaps of our vision and flipping images really isn't energy efficient now, is it?
Live in central Mexico, part of our state of Zacatecas. We have what are called um, the people that have the wolf gene, in that they grow a lot of hair, especially on their face and other parts of their body. Here's a picture of our present governor and some of the children there. As you can see, this outgrowth of excessive hair and facial aspects of them. Now, this is a mutation. It's something that just happens to them. These people, as the article in the newspaper explained, usually get jobs working in circuses as novelty items, the hairy people. Uh, Kind of an unfortunate thing in a way, but here's an example of a mutation. And of course, the thing that we're going to see throughout this and conclude is that the mutations only cause what's already there, more of it or less of it.
John, you could have covered this the first time you were covering mutations. I mean, you would still sound like an idiot, but you would sound like an organized idiot. But what do I know? Anyway, let's go through this. So, first we have substitution. This is the simplest and generally the least harmful of the mutations. It's just substituting one base for another, as seen in this diagram right here. Insertions are mutations in which extra base pairs are inserted into the DNA sequence, hence the term insertion. Deletions are mutations in which part of the DNA is lost or deleted. Insertions and deletions tend to be more deleterious to the organism than simple substitution because they increase or decrease quote unquote information. And before you creationists go nuts over the word information and try to make it a code is not exactly the right word for it. It is just an analogy to help us understand. The protein coding part of DNA is sectioned into codons that are 3 proteins long. Insertions and deletions can mess up these such that they can no longer be translated. These are called frame shifts. A duplication mutation occurs when DNA is copied one or more times. This copy can then be mutated.
Dr. Werner Gitt of the German Federal Institute of Physics and Technology has written a book called In the Beginning Was Information. And he states here very clearly, and he ought to know from all of his experience in computers and in science information, there is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. And so the thing is, evolutionist, what are you going to do to make these different changes? By chance happening? Mutating what's already there? It just doesn't work that way.
Nothing ruins credibility with me quite like the words young earth creationist, of which Werner Gitt is one. Not only that, but he is not a biologist, so he is not an expert in anything biology, and he is not to be believed in anything biology. And even though I don't take anything a young earth creationist says seriously, I am not saying that he is not an expert in biology because he is a young earth creationist. I am saying that he is not an expert in biology because he does not have any advanced degrees in biology. And I'm sure somebody's going to bring up Georgia Purdom of AIG. No, I don't consider her an expert because the only reason she got her PhD in molecular biology was to peddle this shit about young earth creationism and how evolution is not true. It also strikes me as strange that you would depend on the good old quote mining and fellow young earth creationists to prop up your position when, if your position was tenable, it should stand on its own. John, I've already explained how these changes happen, and in fact, you even agree that these changes happen. What else do you want? As you yourself just said, John, it doesn't work that way. I know you didn't mean it the way I meant it, but still, it does not work that way. And you know what? I'm pretty sure you know that.
Dr. Lee Spenter, in his book Not by Chance, points out that all point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. Uh-oh. Evolution has a problem. When mutations occur, we lose information. We don't gain it. Evolution requires that we're going to gain information by having mutations. We're losing.
Lee Spetner is a creationist and he's a mechanical engineer. What does he know about mutations? However, I will point out that he's talking about point mutations, which are not the only mutations out there. Now, I know I said Wikipedia isn't a source, and it's not, but you know what? I don't really care about creationists and quote mines enough to dig into this shit any further. So sue me. Evolution isn't the thing with the problem here, John. It's you. Just because you haven't bothered to find out the different kinds of mutations does not mean that evolution is not true. And what exactly do you mean by information? You know, John, it would really help if you defined your terms, but you don't, so forget it.
Now, let's take a look at cloning. First of all, cloning in general, for one thing, is just a simple manipulation of what's already there. This is how it works. For example, in the case of Dolly, the cloned sheep, what they did in over 200 tries was to take a cell from her mother, in other words, the sheep that they wanted to duplicate. They took some of her cell tissue from her udders, and they took the nucleus from those cells. Then from another sheep, they gathered the female egg and removed its nucleus, taking the nucleus from the cell of the cloning, the sheep they wanted to clone, inserting it into the egg of the sheep that was donating, and then they gave it some electrical shock, and the egg with that new nucleus thought that it was a fertilized egg, and then began to do its normal duplication and growth. These were placed in nutritional solutions and were observed. They took that and implanted it into a third sheep, into her uterus, and there Dolly was born. Now, the interesting thing about Dolly is that she was not, from a few months into growth, it observed that she was not a normal sheep. She was a clone. She was identical to her mother because she was made from just genetic information from her mother. But the thing was, they noticed that by about 2 years of age, she looked to be as old as her mother was. And in fact, sheep normally live to an age of about 12 years. Dolly developed pneumonia, and they had to put her to sleep at 6 years. That's just in the case of Dolly. There's been many other cases.
That is an oversimplification if ever I heard one. First of all, there's natural cloning, which would be asexual reproduction. Then there is gene cloning, reproductive cloning, and therapeutic cloning. You don't really think these things through, do you, John? Don't answer that. I already know the answer. So, Dolly would be the example of reproductive cloning, and therapeutic cloning would be like trying to clone kidneys for somebody. So, don't even try to suggest that cloning is evil because it's not. There are people who need organs who are on the organ donation waiting list who, for whatever reason, can't find a match, and these people would benefit from cloning. Now, let's talk about Dolly. Dolly was not the first animal to be artificially cloned. There were several animals before her who were cloned from embryonic cells. However, Dolly was the first to be cloned from adult cells, which makes her special. It really makes me wonder why you complain about Dolly considering she was not the first clone. Could it be that you didn't do your research and so you don't know that she was the first clone? So you just assume she was the first clone and you complain about her? Also, you didn't tell the full story. Oh, like I'd really expect you to. It was 277 attempts, of which they got 29 embryos, 13 of which were carried in utero for a time, but only one survived to term. She also mated normally and brought forth normal offspring, showing that such cloned animals can mate normally and bring forth normal offspring. And she was put down not because she was cloned, but because she got pneumonia and she had arthritis, both of which are common in sheep. And just as an aside, it's funny to hear a creationist complain about cloning when, if you read Genesis literally, which you claim to do, by the way, Eve would be a literal clone of Adam, which wouldn't that make her Steve and not Eve? Where did she get the X chromosome from?
And by the way, that's one of the reasons cloning of humans is not approved by God, because you're going to have to abort a number of cases. You're going to have to kill a number of growing human beings before they get to an advanced stage, because you're going to see it's not going to work out.
No, that's wrong. 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 No, that's wrong.
Jesus, John, I don't even know where to start with that. Well, let's start with the obvious. The Bible does not mention cloning. And you know why? Because cloning wasn't even thought of back then. You nitwit, why don't you read your book? You see, John, according to your own book, your God performs abortions. Don't believe me? Look up these verses. Groups of cells are not considered living human beings, John. They cannot be considered living human beings unless they can sustain life outside the womb. Please tell me that you are not seriously proposing that an embryo or a fetus that is dependent on its mother for life is living.
For example, do you know why there was the great potato failure in Ireland? Because the potato was imported from South America, but they only brought a few strains of the many strains of potatoes that there are. And so when a plague hit that area of Ireland, it destroyed virtually the whole potato crop, because there were strains that would have been resistant to that plague that had not been brought.
John, I love it when you spew utter bullshit. Now, the potato was introduced to Ireland around 1570, and the potato famine wasn't until about 1845. There are over 150 species of potatoes, only one of which was exported to Europe. However, within that one species, there are 600 varieties grown in Europe. Aside from that fact, potatoes are known to be susceptible to diseases. This has been known for a very long time. But aside from these facts, what the hell does the potato famine have to do with cloning? Is there a point to this, or are you just yapping? Personally, I think you just love to hear yourself talk, John, because You have made so many points that have nothing to do with anything.
Cloning of humans will be done. Not because it's right, not because it's legal. It's because there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of fame in it. People are going to be cloned. Think of just one thing, or several things. One is, there's some rich person, very rich person, and at 30 years of age, this person says, well, in 30 more years, I'm going to be 60 years old, and about that time, my kidneys might start to fail, or my liver, or I might need to have some other organ in my body failing. And so I'm going to clone myself. I'm going to make a number of clones of myself. And so when I'm 60, my clones will be about 30, and I can go and harvest from these clones organs that will be identical to mine. And that's what some people have in mind.
Cloning humans? Yeah, I can see that, if it hasn't happened already. Cloning humans for spare parts? No. That's what cloning organs is for. Come on, John. Pay attention to what's happening around you. Organs are already being cloned. Now, I haven't found anything where they have successfully put a cloned organ in a human, but if they have not, I don't think they're far off. Come on, John. Wake up, smell the coffee, and get with the program. I also find it very hilarious that you would even bring up this topic, considering it puts a major dent in your argument that humans can't create other humans. That's just too good to pass up. Wait a second, is that why you say God forbids human cloning, even though he doesn't? Because cloning wasn't even a thing back then? Because creating humans is supposed to be in the purview of your God, and it no longer is? Your God is a weak ass God if he's got to depend on his little flunkies complaining for him. You know what, John? If he wants to complain, why doesn't he come down and do it himself? John goes on to complain about other genetically modified organisms. Not quite sure why, because we, including you, John, have benefited from genetically modified organisms. So shut up.
Very famous. This little boy has, if you can look closely, count, he has 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. He has 24 toes and fingers. Now, he's a normal boy. He could run and jump and play just like everybody else. Has a mutation that produced 1 finger, 1 toe more. Now, in this process of studying life at the molecular level, the evolutionists have come to realize, hey, getting different variety by mutations is just not working. We lose information, or if it produces anything, they're just a bunch of freaks that wouldn't last any.
Jesus, John, you're a moron. First, you tell us that mutations don't produce any more quote unquote information, whatever the fuck that is. And then you tell us about a little boy who has 24 fingers and toes, which is more quote unquote information. Make up your mind. Which is it? And then you have the audacity to call them freaks who wouldn't last anyway. Look, John, that little boy has a harmless mutation. Yes, there are harmless mutations. You just showed us that. And by the way, he could probably play a mean piano. Thank you very much for insulting everyone who has any type of a mutation. I think that I can say confidently that I speak for all of them when I say, go fuck yourself, John. And you show a picture of a 2-headed fish later on. And while I'm already so hot and bothered, I'm going to go ahead and address it here. First of all, that's not a mutation, you fucking ass. It's an egg that did not separate correctly. And there are 2 women alive today. Yes, John, I said women. Last time I checked, they were about 22, who share one body, but they have 2 heads. And they have lived because they have 2 sets of lungs and 2 hearts. I think they also have 2 stomachs, but everything from the intestines down, they share. So they share the intestines, and they only have 2 legs. So, yeah, thank you very much. You just showed everyone what a dumbass you really are. Not to mention the fact that you hate people who have special needs or people who are in some way different from you. Shame on you, John. By the way, those women's names are Abby and Brittany, in case you want to look them up. They are school teachers and they are living normal lives.
It first started out with the name as the Hopeful Monster. Now it's come up with a name that's called Punctuated Equilibrium. Just a fancy name to say this. Picture, if you will, a crocodile who lays eggs. And when these eggs hatch out, birds come out. You say, oh, you're making that up. I'm not making it up. That's exactly what they believe. Because they've seen it, they realize they have to somehow get these other species to arise. And from mutations is just not the way to do it. So they invent this new thing. It's in the literature. They believe it.
Up until now, John, I have given you the benefit of the doubt that you are just stupid and misinformed, but no more. I am calling you a fucking liar because nobody but a liar would believe this. Punctuated equilibrium is Stephen Jay Gould's model of evolution that does not in any way contradict natural selection. It states that there are periods of stasis followed by rapid evolution. So let's see how this would work. Let's say there's a population of mollusks living in the sea and they experience evolution at a static rate by natural selection over a few thousand years. Lowering sea levels traps a small population of mollusks in a lake. Due to their new environment, they have new selection pressures, and due to their small population, they experience genetic drift. Because fossilization is rare to begin with, we do not find fossilized remains of this punctuated equilibrium because of their small population size to begin with. Over time, sea levels rise, reintroducing the isolated population of mollusks to their larger population of mollusks, thereby the mollusks that result have a bigger change. Now, John, tell me, what in anything I just explained sounds anything near a crocodile giving birth to a duck, you simpleton?
The survival of the fittest or the luckiest. For example, if a large fish swims through a school of smaller fish, there's some that are going to escape not because they're necessarily more fit. They just happen to be out of the path where his big mouth was going. They were the luckiest. The bigger question is, what about the arrival of the fittest? You see, where did life come from to begin with? That's the question evolutionists are afraid to answer. And of course, again, we come back to is that life comes from life. God has life. He is the giver of life. He's the producer of life.
John, I'm trying to understand just what the hell you think the definition of fitness is, but for the life of me, I just can't. But whatever you think it is not what biologists term as fitness. So let me try to explain this as simply as I can so that maybe you can understand this. Biological fitness is simply the ability of an organism to pass on its genetics to offspring. Now, on to your main point. Evolution does not answer the question of where life came from. That is the purview of abiogenesis, which falls into organic chemistry. The theory of evolution only answers the question of how life proliferated after it got here. That is, how do we get all of the life forms we have on Earth today? And now for the hilarious part. John, if life comes from life, where did God come from? Because God's alive, right? So he has life, meaning he had to come from somewhere. Wow, John, you finally found something you're good at. Showing your stupidity. And with that brilliant display of stupidity and self-abuse and falling into that glorious trap, I'm going to leave it right there. Wow. Debunking all this bullshit and stupidity really works up an appetite. So, yeah, I'm going to go eat now and, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I hope you subscribe if you're not already subscribed. If you are subscribed, make sure you're still subscribed. YouTube likes to unsubscribe people. Leave a like and a comment down below. What do you think, guys? On a scale of 1 to 10 face palms, I'd have to say this one ranks at least a solid 8. Leave your ranking down below. Well, that's all for this absolute train wreck of a video. Hope to see you on the next debunked train wreck.